warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching the Discourse with me, Pereira. Since you're here, I have a humble request. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content so that more people get to know about Bharata First. That's it, nothing more. Do contribute to keep our content alive as well. The link is in the description below. A small contribution that you make goes a long way in us bringing you this content. Well, on with the discussion now. BRICS leaders announced last week the admission of 6 new countries from next year as the club of large and populous emerging economies seeks to reshape the global order. The BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, agreed at their annual summit to make Argentina, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates full members from January 1st. In this edition of the Discourse, we will analyze the BRICS Summit 2023, the key takeaways and highlights. Joining me on the program today are Major General Ashwani Siwach, retired strategic expert, and Ambassador Suresh K. Goel, a career diplomat. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of the Discourse. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's understand the key highlights, the key takeaways really as far as the BRICS Summit is concerned.
Frank, the key agenda for the BRICS meeting in South Africa this time, of course, there was rather an extensive agenda, but I'm going to talk about the main highlights and the main focus was really number one, the expansion of BRICS. Number two, Ukraine war obviously overshadowed everything else. And number three was usual economic issues, China's presence at the summit, but usual economic issues, etc., which were there for the agenda. But as I mentioned first, the main highlight really was expansion of BRICS. The expansion had begun to occupy attention of most of the countries even before the meeting began. Eventually, there was expansion, even though there was a huge debate on advisability of expansion, and if so, how we should go about it, which included guidelines, criterion, etc. And eventually, it does seem in the end that there were some guidelines, even though they are not in public domain, not all, to the best of my knowledge, but the guidelines, the criterion which should be adopted, and to determine the countries who could join join BRICS on the basis of those guidelines. Frank.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador, for putting it into perspective as to what the key highlights really as far as this particular meet was concerned. General, let me bring you into the picture. Let's focus on the first agenda, the biggest takeaway really as far as this summit was concerned, the inclusion of the 6 nations into the grouping itself. How do you look at that from a strategic point of view, keeping in mind everything else that has been happening from a geopolitical perspective?
Yeah, Frank, as far as, BRICS is concerned today, as on today with the 5 countries which are there, it is representing almost 42% of the world population and 24% of GDP and 18% of the trade and 30% of the land boundary. Now, these all countries which are there, they are the emerging economies. But the point today, what it looks like that is it become something anti-NATO, anti-Western, or these are an alternative to the basically the West. Now, this is a mute question. Now, what has happened is those countries which are waiting in the wings as far as BRICS are concerned, it's an overwhelming response. There are about 40 countries which have want to join the BRICS, and out of them, almost 24 of them have officially applied for it. Ultimately, the 6 countries which have been taken, they all are from Global South. These are Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, Ethiopia, and Argentina. Now, these are certain things which stands out in these 6 countries which are taken. One is that 3 of them are very oil-rich countries. One is Saudi, UAE, and Iran. They represent almost 30% of the oil reserve in the world. The second thing is this also represent the Latin America and also Africa, the Ethiopia and Argentina. So the point today is coming is China and Russia trying to find an alternate to G7, G20 or against the Western world, because they are feeling isolated, especially Russia, and so is China. You know, they want trade partners. And if you find more of these countries joining BRICS, and especially oil rich, now it becomes very easy for them. And that's why the next step which they are trying to convey is that the BRICS must have its own currency, or there should be a BRICS currency. The reason is this: the trade will become easier in these between these nations. And this will benefit China and Russia the maximum, because they stand isolated and they think that today the dollar which is dominating, you know, in 2015-16, the type of trade which was taking the world was almost about 70 to 80% through the dollar. Now it has reduced to almost 50%. There are countries like India and China itself, which we are importing oil from Russia. It is in terms of our own currencies, that is ruble and rupee, and so is China. So the question which is coming is that this 6 countries which have joined, and now they have become 11. Is it this going to become a group which is basically anti-West, or it is basically going to only work for the future of the southern globe? You know, that is a very important question which is coming. And it is looking, is it being dominated by China and Russia? And India has become, without realizing a partner to that. That is another important thing which is there. You remember that as far as the BRICS is concerned, there are not too many highlights which has happened after it has on inception from 2001. The only one which is there is New Development Bank, which has come and in 2014 and was basically projected by India. It has given loan to almost 70 infrastructure, other than not. So to me, it looks like these 11 countries which are coming together, and this is the brainwave of China and Russia. They wanted to enlarge it. They want to have a voice against the Western country. It is basically seemingly looks to be against the Western bloc, and this BRIC bloc will be dominated in time to come by both China and Russia. Frank.
Thank you, General, for elaborating on this particular aspect as well and bringing all those points out. Ambassador, let us focus on this for a bit. You know, what does this mean? You know, we're talking about 6 countries in this particular round, and there's also talk about more countries being a part of BRICS in the near future. And India too initially was skeptical about this, you know, raised several concerns, but you know, have also welcomed all these 6 new members on board with open arms, and have said that as long as due process is followed, not really elaborating on what exactly this due process is, that we are welcome to take on board more nations as well. So how do you see this panning out?
Frank, first of all, I mean, if you look at the functioning of BRICS over the last few years, and if you try to recall what has been the outcome of these meetings, including the outcome document from South Africa this time, I think, first of all, we will be very hard put to actually identify and put a finger on specific results of the meeting, either economically or politically or strategically. There have been several ideas. Bangladesh has become member of the New Development Bank, the bank now. Argentina has come in. There are 3 more countries which have joined the BRICS Bank. And therefore, there is a kind of a satisfaction that BRICS is now really growing, both in number, in terms of the bank, partners in the bank, and the BRICS itself. But beyond the numbers, there is a very strong feeling that BRICS is slowly emerging as a China-centric organization, and there are difficulties from the other, particularly from the West, that there is a creation of another anti-West organization, and that is not going away, despite everything. So we need to be careful that the organization, as it develops further, as it acquires new membership, etc., what kind of a shape is it going to take? What kind of a role is it going to play in economic development of the global south, southern country. Because all said and done, even though in the outcome document, there are references to strategic issues, terrorism, and so on and so forth. But primarily, BRICS' purpose was really economic agenda and to work on the economic partnership, development, connectivity issues between these countries. If you recall, it started actually the origin of BRICS itself was RIC, Russia, India, and China. Now, the nature of the dialogue between Russia, India, and China, and that too in late 1990s or early 2000, clearly indicated what the organization is going to be like really. Fortunately, then Brazil came in, South Africa came in, and slowly there has been a kind of a dilution of anti-West agenda, but that remains a main problem. Beyond the number, and I think India's focus really in this case has been to ensure that whoever comes as a member, there are two things, even though they are not specified there in any of the documents as to how it came to be, has to be that there should be some kind of an economic compatibility between the members. Pakistan was awarded on grounds of how declining its GDP is, and whether because of the declining GDP and the low GDP country, will it be actually able to contribute to the purposes of BRICS, really, including in the bank. That is how they were able to keep Pakistan out, even though China did try for it. And number two, in terms of the geopolitical balancing role played by each country. Now, if you look at all these three countries, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Ethiopia, and which is the fifth country, sorry, the name skips me again.
Iran.
Iran. With the exception of Iran, which is a major energy producer, energy supplier, and which also is now in dialogue with the USA to basically see the relations are on track between the two, that talking about basically how to go about establishing those relations again. All the other countries have more or less even relations with the USA. Saudi Arabia, UAE, we know the kind of relationship they have got, but also these countries have fairly good relations with China. You know, in the case of Saudi Arabia, there have been exchange of visits. United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia is again having a huge energy trade with China. UAE connectivity and infrastructure projects, China is involved. Ethiopia. So all these countries, Egypt, you name it. So they have both good relations with USA as well as China. So hopefully, these countries will be able to maintain the organization on an even keel.
Absolutely. So we hope that happens, because that's the idea really, because India too is close to all these nations that we mentioned too and have come on board, and the others that are planning to come on board as well. So for India, this is going to be extremely crucial as well. Right. All right. Moving forward now, talking about India, General, as far as India is concerned, like the ambassador pointed out as well, as far as BRICS was concerned, the main agenda has been economy, but we've seen politics also come into the picture and take, center stage. And we've seen several strategic issues coming to the point as well, especially issues like Ukraine, issues like terrorism, and so on and so forth. So as far as India is concerned, what is key for us with regards to BRICS? And what is it that we need to watch out for?
Yeah, very correct, Frank. First of all, as far as why, all these 6 countries which have been picked up, why these 6 countries, I just touch upon that. The point is that very rightly brought out that once upon a time, the US was very much interested in West Asia, called Middle East also, and they had a strong influence. But of late, that their influence or their sort of interest has shifted from here to Indo-Pacific, and there has been a vacuum which has been created, and this vacuum has been made full use by China, and that's why the erstwhile allies of US like Saudis and UAE, the tilt is slightly going toward China. That is the point which has to understand, and that's why these countries have been picked up, the 6 countries. Though all these 6 countries which have been picked up, they are picked up on consensus, and also some sort of rules and regulation have been framed, which possibly have not been spelled out. But these countries are not inspiring a lot of confidence. You remember Ethiopia is the largest, one of the largest countries which have taken debt. The Argentina economy is also not doing too well. And Iran and Saudis are is something like what India and China are there. Though, of course, the relation have been improved on the behest of China. But all said and done, as far as India is concerned, what we have to be very careful is that so far it does not seem that we have really derived some economic interest out of BRICS as a nation. What we have to be careful is that it should not become an anti-West bloc. And we don't want to be seen with the anti-West bloc because it will be counterproductive for us. We want to be the voice of global South. To that, we are quite happy to work with China, Russia, and other countries. But exactly what Brazil also is saying, they don't want to be shown to the world that they are counter to G7 or G20. They want to show that they want the economies which are emerging, which are coming up to get together. Now, that is where the point comes is, are they interested in their own currency? Now, South Africa has brought out this issue very clearly that this point was not discussed, and this will be now become an agenda point for the next BRICS Summit. The question comes is a challenge is going to be given to a dollar? Because today the dollar is a reserve currency of the world, and that is why it is strong, because the oil, almost 70 to 80% is still being deal with through the dollar. Now, if there is a BRICS currency, now imagine 30 to 40% of oil within these countries itself, then the dollar will be challenged in any way. Now, that point which comes, India doesn't want to become a partner to that. So therefore, India has to be very, very careful, because this is a forum which is mainly dominated by China. And of course, Russia is not a force to reckon with, but Russia will take a side where the China is going. So India has to be very careful to carve out a path for itself with a country like Brazil, so that we show to the world that we are not for anti-West bloc. We want a voice of global South. We want the economies of the global South to come up. That is our agenda. That is how we should work out. Sort of these countries which become 11 from 1st January 2024, we should able to coordinate, cooperate with each other, so that it helps all the countries by mutually connecting with each other. The economy of these countries improve, and especially because they are all representing the global South. But at the same time, we don't want to be seen as an anti-West or anti-G7. That is a challenge to India. I think our path is very clear. We have made it loud and clear that we are going to take our path in a manner that we can basically sustain both and achieve both the goals simultaneously. Frank.
Absolutely. That's the direction that we are moving in. We've seen our foreign policy in the last few years as well move in that particular direction, be multi-aligned rather than non-alignment. That was, of course, a different era, but now we seem to be strongly aligned with all these nations, and that's the message that we want to send out as well. All right, time to get quick closing comments from both my panelists with the best way forward and what next. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Frank. I think this is the key point in the discussion here, the best way forward. China is trying to really evolve BRICS as an organization it can use to expand its own influence in the global South, most of which countries are really either in Africa or in Latin America and in some parts of Asia. India's attempt also, or India's objective also, is to make sure that India remains relevant in the global South, as we said at the G20, right in the beginning when the first meeting took place and the Prime Minister chaired the meeting of the global South. And I think the way forward is not going to be. This is the time when G20 is going to take place on 9th September in Delhi. We should try to develop G20 now as a forum where the South, countries of the South, Africa Union is going to become a member at this meeting here, that the global South countries can enter into a conversation with the developed countries and work out modalities for the financial transfers and the financial inflows through investment, through climate-related projects, green projects, through projects for infrastructure development, etc., etc. China is going to use the new development bank to basically push its own economic agenda, its own connectivity projects in the countries of the South. We need to make sure that in the economic areas, China does not become the preponderant country working with the global South, and that range of countries involved there remains diverse as it is at the moment, really. So India must work on expanding its own cooperation agenda, South-South agenda, as well as maintain its strong presence in the new development bank and use G20 to promote the agenda as a kind of, injunction but as an alternative. BRICS is there, but also G20, because eventually the finances are with the developed countries and they need to come forward, and they are in G20. Right.
Absolutely. We need to be tactful. That's what's going to be key as far as India is concerned, and that's what will work in our favor. All right, General, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, Frank, the biggest challenge as far as India is concerned is the more the grow in the membership of BRICS is quite beneficial to China and to some extent to Russia, because we are giving them on the plate those countries which they can directly coordinate. And these are of the global South, and few of these countries of Latin America and also Africa which will come. They are all part of Belt Road Initiative of China. And therefore, the influence will grow in time to come. What India needs to do is that we must now give an alternate to these countries. Slowly and surely, they are also realizing that majority of the countries which are now become a part of BRI are coming in a debt trap. We should be able to give them an alternative. The way we are becoming a voice of global South in G20, we are saying African Union will be participating G20 as a special invitee. So the question is that the importance should be more on a G20 where there is basically collusion between the underdeveloped countries and also the more developing countries, and also look after the voice of global South. So therefore, the challenge today to India in BRICS is that let the China not become the whole sole guarantor of functioning of BRICS and able to influence more countries. We should carve out a path for ourselves wherein we have a substantial influence in these countries which are poor in Latin America and also in African continent, so that we are directly one-to-one then, rather than the China getting everything on the plate. So that is the biggest challenge. I suppose the G20, the way we are handling, we can learn some lessons from that, because there are a lot of things, commonality. G20, what we are doing, majority of these countries are all member of G20 also. I suppose India has understood as to what should be our path. We don't want the West to feel it, that we are a part of anti-West alliance or bloc. At the same time, we must able to get the best out of it. If there are 11 countries, how it should benefit us. At the same time, we should also see that this forum does not become totally controlled by China in time to come. Frank.
Absolutely. Very well said by both the panelists. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of the Discourse and putting things into perspective for us. So what's coming out of this discussion is that the inclusion of the 6 new countries into the BRICS grouping is a welcome step. There are many nations within the grouping itself that are dragging their feet and have been doing so for some time now. The oil-rich new members will add new vigor to BRICS. Trade will become easier as well, as the grouping has decided to use BRICS currencies. Now, India should be careful and watch out that this doesn't become an anti-West bloc. It is going to be a tightrope walk for India going forward, something we have become adept at in the recent years. India should ensure that the focus relies or remains on the economy, and we work towards cooperation and coordination on that front. Well, that's it on this edition of The Discourse. But since you made it this far, I would remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content so that more people get to know about Bharata first. We also have a YouTube membership program with some great perks. Do check it out under the join button and join now. Until next time, this is Frank Rausan Pereira signing off.